On the 13th of February 2017, a North Korean man calling himself Kim Chol was walking through Kuala Lumpur International Airport in Malaysia when he was suddenly and strangely assaulted by two women. One of the women grabbed Kim from behind and an unknown liquid was splashed on his face. Next, the second assailant had covered Kim's face in a cloth laced with liquid. Concerned and confused, Kim summoned an airport receptionist and explained what had just happened to him. It was a strange assault, two unidentified girls suddenly ambushing a 45-year-old man before disappearing into the crowds of the airport. Little did anyone know, however, that this was no strange assault on a random man. It was an assassination. In the following minutes, Kim Chol would be dead, the victim of VX nerve agent. An investigation into the man's death revealed that he was not who he claimed to be. His name was not Kim Chol. His real name was Kim Jong-nam, and he was the eldest son of Kim Jong-il, the former dictator of North Korea. The investigation would later reveal that the two women who had carried out the attack had both been unwittingly duped into participating, both thinking that they were simply playing a prank on their victim. Although the two girls didn't know what they were doing, their instructors did. A cadre of North Korean spies had been grooming the girls for months in preparation for the attack, and with the deed now done, these handlers slipped away, never to be seen again. In the end, it was determined that the attack was nothing less than the organized assassination of a prominent member in North Korea's leading family, and that the killing of Kim Jong-nam was likely ordered by none other than his own brother, the North Korean head of state himself, Kim Jong-un. These are three stories of bad brothers. This is the retelling. On the 26th of December in the year 211, Publius Septimus Geta, better known simply as Geta, approached his mother's royal apartments in the company of only his nearest advisors. At 22 years old, Geta was one of the Roman Empire's most important men, serving as co-emperor alongside his older brother Marcus Aurelius Antonius, better known as Caracalla. Despite being brothers with less than a year in age separating them, Geta and his older brother had never gotten along. In fact, they hated each other. When their father had died earlier in the year, the two brothers had traveled back to Rome separately, never once staying in the same place as one another or sharing a meal in each other's presence. They hated each other so much that they had considered dividing the empire into two halves, one for each of them, and they may have attempted to carry out such designs were it not for their powerful and influential mother, Julia Domna. Julia had been a trusted and valued advisor to her husband, and she knew well how to rule the empire. She was skilled, shrewd, and cunning. It was through her efforts alone that Geta and Caracalla had not already split the empire in two. Though she had saved them from splitting the empire, Julia Domna could not save her sons from splitting the royal palace. Not long into the brothers' terms as co-emperors, they split the royal palace in half, refusing to work or deal with one another. Despite everyone's best wishes, it was soon clear to all that co-ruling was not working out. While the brothers feuded, their mother took on much of the responsibilities of the empire, thus saving it from outright collapse. The feuding between the two brothers came to a head on the 17th of December in the year 211, during the festival of Saturnalia, when Caracalla tried, unsuccessfully, to murder his younger brother. It had been a bold move by Caracalla, and one that signified a significant increase in hostility between the two emperors. They'd always hated each other. Now, however, one of them was willing to stoop to public murder. Things were getting too dangerous in Rome. Something had to be done. A deal had to be made. The brothers had to reconcile. A meeting was scheduled between the two co-emperors, and it was to take place at their mother's apartments, a setting selected for its disarming neutrality. There, overseen by their mother, the co-rulers could meet in peace, with no friends, no supporters, and no bodyguards present. They would meet and talk as family. Leaving his bodyguards by the door to his mother's home, Geta entered the domicile and shook off the cold of the winter month. Despite his mother's guarantees of peace, he may have been feeling wary or suspicious. It had only been a week since the festival of Saturnalia, where Caracalla had tried to kill him. As he walked through the halls of his mother's villa, Geta must have checked every corner and eyed every servant. Perhaps he glanced over his shoulder here or there, or maybe he walked with his hand resting ready on the hilt of his dagger. Perhaps he was ready for something. Perhaps he was not. The details of what happened next are lost to time, though what is known is that Geta was lured into a trap. Arriving at the scheduled meeting, Geta was attacked by Caracalla's Praetorian Guard, and he died in his mother's arms. Hearing the screams of protest from his mother, Geta would have been stabbed and slashed as he was overwhelmed by attacks from trained professional soldiers. He may have been ambushed, or he may have seen them coming. He may have tried to fight, or he may have tried to flee. We simply don't know. In any case, Geta, at 22 years old, lay dying. As his killers backed away, Geta was seized by his mother, who held him in her arms as his life slowly ebbed away. The feud between brothers was over. Caracalla had won. He had tarnished his honor, betrayed his brother, and possibly his mother, but he was finally sole emperor. Caracalla ordered a damnatio memoriae against his brother's memory. Geta's name and image were then stricken from any art or record that bore it. The assassination of Geta was a wicked and dishonorable deed, but it was only the first in what would become many thousands of killings. As sole emperor, Caracalla would order the deaths of all those who had supported his younger brother. Geta's friends and staff, his soldiers and advisors, and anyone else affiliated with the late co-emperor were all hunted down and executed. In the end, as many as 20,000 people may have been killed. Caracalla would go on to rule as sole emperor for another 16 years, though most of his responsibilities were handled by his mother, as he found managing the empire to be a boring and tedious affair. His reign saw the construction of the Baths of Caracalla, as well as the introduction of the Edict of Caracalla. Even still, Caracalla is not seen as a good emperor, and no one could ever say he was a good brother. In the summer of 1066, a Saxon longship sailed into port in Norway. It carried an embittered and angry man. His name was Tostig Godwinson. He was a Saxon nobleman, former earl, and brother to Harold Godwinson, King of England. Tostig had once been a wealthy and powerful man. He had been Earl of Northumbria, controlling vast swaths of land and people, but he'd thrown it all away through mismanagement and heavy-handedness. Tostig was never popular in Northumbria, and when a rebellion sprang up to oust him, he had little chance of quelling it on his own. And so he went looking for help. The King of England at the time, Edward the Confessor, refused to help, and even Tostig's own family refused as well. The rebels demanded that the king remove Tostig from Northumbria and banish him from the realm. Harold Godwinson, one of the most prominent and influential men in all the realm and Tostig's brother, urged the king to agree to the rebels' demands. Harold Godwinson was not a cruel brother. In fact, one of the factors that had made the Godwinson family so successful up to that point was their loyalty and their ability to work together. Harold wasn't a bad brother. He was simply a practical man. Tostig had already proven himself incapable of ruling Northumbria, and what was more, there was a growing threat of a certain warlike duke across the channel in Normandy, one who seemed to believe that he would be the successor to Edward the Confessor. Harold recognized that stability and unity in the realm were more valuable than family bonds. England needed to be ready for an invasion from Normandy, and it couldn't do all of that if Northumbria was in revolt. So Tostig was out. He was banished from the realm, and his earldom was given over to someone else. With Northumbria pacified, the Saxons could finally turn their attention to the south and to Normandy. But Tostig was not done. He wasn't going to go down so easily. The way he saw it, he'd been betrayed by his subjects, his king, and his family. Tostig wanted payback. He wanted revenge. So it was that he went in search of allies, and in the early summer of 1066 found himself in the court of the legendary Norwegian king, Harald Hardrada. Harald Hardrada, called the Thunderbolt of the North in his day, or Hard Ruler, is sometimes called the last Viking, and for good reason. At nearly 7 feet tall, he was a raider, a warrior, a poet, a pirate, a mercenary, a king, and a conqueror. He'd been from Norway to Russia, Constantinople to Sicily. He truly was a legendary man, and one who deserves his own retelling in the future. Now, however, the king of the Norwegians was nearing the end of his saga. He was entering his 50s, old age for a fighting man, and his days of adventure would soon be behind him. Harald Hardrada had lived a life of accomplishment and adventure. No one could argue that. But what if he could achieve something more? One more great victory, one more conquest to cap off the epic deeds of a living legend. What if he could become the King of England? That was just the offer that Tostig Godwinson now brought before him. With Harald Hardrada's army and with Tostig's knowledge of the land, the two men could sail across the seas and have England as their own. Harald Hardrada would be made king, and Tostig would get his old earldom back. Tostig knew the land of Northumbria. He could provide valuable insight on when to sail, where to land ships, and which settlements to attack first. Tostig knew his brother was preoccupied in the south, preparing for an invasion from Normandy. The north was weak and vulnerable. Now was the time to strike. Now was the time for revenge. Whatever Tostig said to the Norwegian king, whatever he promised or guaranteed, it worked. In the following weeks, Harald Hardrada was gathering his armies and amassing his ships for yet another adventure. When Tostig and the Norwegian king landed in England in September of 1066, they had with them a sizable army. With the bulk of the English army in the south awaiting invasion from Normandy, the invaders were met with little resistance. Tostig had done it. He'd returned to his lands with an army at his back. He'd been betrayed, and now here he was, getting his revenge. He didn't care about his family or the good of the realm. He cared about himself, and he cared about revenge. In the following days, Tostig would have a taste of this revenge. He and the Norwegian king defeated a local Saxon army of Northumbrians and Mercians before invading and taking hostages from the city of York. For Tostig and the Norwegian king, the invasion had been a smash success. They had landed, defeated an army, and seized a major settlement. But their good fortune wouldn't last forever. Hearing of his brother in the north, the Saxon king Harold immediately marched north to meet the Norwegians. In a stunning feat of military maneuvers, the English army marched north from London to York, a distance of more than 180 miles, in only 4 days, and they caught the Norwegian force completely by surprise. Even though they were caught off guard and unprepared at the Battle of Stamford Bridge, the Norwegians put up a strong defense. In the end, however, it was not enough. Tostig and his Norwegian ally were defeated, both of them having been slain in the fighting. A chronicler from a generation later, William of Malmesbury, claims that Tostig's body was so badly mutilated that he had to be identified by a wart between his shoulder blades. Harold Godwinson would not have long to revel in his victory. To the south, the threat of William of Normandy had become a reality, and England was once again being invaded. Harold Godwinson was once again forced to march the length of his kingdom, though the outcome of the next battle would not be so favorable. Would the Battle of Hastings had a different outcome if it weren't for the fact that Harold Godwinson had been forced to march over 350 miles in a matter of days? Who can say? What is certain is that history may have played out very differently if it weren't for Tostig Godwinson being a bad brother. In early April of 1195, the Byzantine Emperor Isaac II Angelos was away from his court on a hunting trip. The trip was a much-needed distraction from the troublesome and impossible responsibilities of ruling the empire. At this time, the Byzantine Empire was beset with troubles on every border. To the north were the Bulgarians, and to the east were the Turks. Beyond them were the war-torn Holy Lands where Crusaders and Muslims fought in a seemingly endless struggle. The past few years had been hard on the empire. It had suffered several humiliating defeats, and its once mighty navy was now reduced to no more than 30 galleys. To make matters even worse for the emperor, there was the constant threat of pretenders and usurpers from within his own realm. Military generals, palace officials, disgruntled governors, any one of them could rise up at a moment's notice and march on the emperor to steal his throne. Isaac knew this well. He himself had come to power through usurpation 10 years earlier, when he'd had himself declared emperor by popular support. This was politics in the Byzantine Empire. It was dangerous, unpredictable, and violent. A lesson that the current emperor was about to learn for himself. Breathing in the fresh spring air of the Macedonian countryside, Isaac II must have done all that he could to forget about his current situation back home. Stress can kill a man, and anyone at the helm of the Byzantine Empire at this point in history would have been very stressed. Sadly for him, however, his day was about to get worse. While Isaac had been away on his hunting trip, his own brother had been conspiring against him. His brother was called Alexios, and he seemed to be under the belief that he could do a better job at ruling than his brother. With the help of his wife and most of the army, Alexios was proclaimed emperor. Back in Macedonia, Isaac II was arrested. Pulled from his horse by men he thought were his own soldiers, Isaac must have been confused and more than a bit worried. As he was hauled away from his friends and supporters, he must have known what was happening. He was being deposed. Isaac must have never expected such a betrayal from his own brother. Years earlier, Alexios had been a prisoner in Acre, and Isaac had sent warships and soldiers to try and free him. Once freed, Alexios was showered with honors and titles by his brother, making him a wealthy and powerful man. Isaac must have never expected such betrayal. Shortly after his capture, Isaac II was blinded on the orders of his brother. Blinding was a common form of political mutilation in the Byzantine Empire. It was one of several methods intended to make someone unfit for rule. It was also a convenient way to get rid of someone without being marked as a murderer. Isaac II would have been tightly bound and held by his jailers while a sharp knife was heated before him. As his head was gripped firmly in the arms of a torturer, Isaac might have been advised not to fight it, as that would only make the procedure more dangerous than it already was. The best he could do now was to try and relax and wait to have his eyes put out. Betrayed and blinded, Isaac II's miseries were not yet over. His brother Alexios next ordered him to be imprisoned, and he was confined to dungeons in Constantinople. Alexios III's reign was no better than his brother's. He spent a fortune in bribes and favors, seeking to solidify his place as emperor. When he needed more money, he plundered imperial tombs for treasure. In the east, the empire was overrun by the Seljuk Turks, and to the north, Alexios III's alliance with Serbia had dissolved, leaving the empire without any allies in the region. In the year 1203, a new threat presented itself to Alexios III, namely, the Fourth Crusade. Isaac II's son was among the Crusaders, and he had persuaded them to turn their attention to Constantinople, swearing that he could end the East-West schism if the Crusaders helped him secure the throne from his wicked uncle. In July of 1203, the Crusaders scaled the walls of Constantinople and secured significant portions of the city. This forced the emperor to take action. Alexios III's capital city was being attacked and burned down around him. Generals, courtiers, and advisors all demanded that he do something. If he didn't, he would be seen as an incompetent coward. On the 17th of July, Alexios III led a force of many thousands out of the gate of St. Romanos to do battle against the Crusaders. By all accounts, the Byzantines greatly outnumbered the Crusaders, but Alexios III wasn't up to the challenge, and he withdrew his forces back into the city without a fight. That night, under the cover of darkness, Alexios III gathered up what gold and treasure he could find, and he boarded a ship with one of his daughters before escaping into the night, leaving the rest of his family, as well as his empire, behind to fend for themselves. With the Crusaders in command of Constantinople, it was not Isaac II's son that was then put on the throne. Rather, it was Isaac II himself. After 8 years a prisoner, the blind Isaac II was once again proclaimed emperor. Sadly for him, his second reign was no better than his first. He reigned for less than a year before another influential courtier seized power. Isaac II then died of shock, and his son was strangled. Isaac II was not a good emperor, nor was his brother Alexios III, but of the two of them, I think only one was a bad brother. Hey, thanks for watching. There are a lot more stories of bad brothers throughout history, and maybe I'll cover some of those in a future video. If you enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like, a comment, or subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. And I'll see you in the next one.